Coming up on New Day at Arirang, South Korea on course to confirm on Tuesday an additional 3,000 new COVID-19 cases. In the coming days, the government will announce new social distancing measures. COVID-19 hospitalizations in the U.S. reach a record high, more than 132,000. Officials attribute it to a surge caused by the Omicron variant. The jump in patients is putting enormous strain on healthcare systems in several states. Plus, back to the drawing board. The U.S. Russia talks in Geneva aimed at easing tensions over Ukraine end with no concrete results.
Hello and welcome to this Tuesday edition of New Day at Arirang. It's 8 a.m. on January 11th here in Seoul, South Korea. Thank you for joining us. I'm Kim Mo-gyan.
And I'm Mark Broom. Over the next hour, we'll take a look at the big news stories of the day and get expert insights on the issues facing Korea and the world. We do have some breaking news just in, though. South Korea's Joint Chiefs of Staff says North Korea has fired yet another unidentified projectile towards the East Sea. That happened this morning.
No further details, such as the projectile type or flight distance, are known yet. And the latest missile launch comes just about a week after the North test-fired what it says was a hypersonic missile last week. Now, that makes Tuesday's launch already the second show of force of the new year. For more details, we'll have more details in a later newscast.
Yes, we certainly will. Now we're going to turn to the COVID-19 situation here in South Korea. The country forecasting around another 3,000 new COVID-19 cases on this Tuesday.
This comes as authorities are preparing to announce new social distancing measures for this week. For more on this and other updates, our Choi Min-jung is here in the studio with us. Good morning, Min-jung.
Good morning.
Tell us what we're expecting for today.
Mo-gyan, we're expecting the daily tally for today to surpass the 3,000 mark once again. From midnight to 9 p.m. on Monday, South Korea reported around 2,700 cases. This is a drop of more than 800 cases from the same time 2 weeks ago. Although the country continues to see a gradual decline in the number of infections, authorities say it is not the time to let our guards down due to the spread of the Omicron variant. Over the past week, Omicron infections increased by a little more than 1,000 cases. As of Monday, the country reported a total of 2,351 Omicron cases. Health authorities are saying that the variant will become the most dominant strain within this month, and to prepare for a potential surge in cases, authorities are planning to increase the number of PCR tests that can be taken in a day from the current 750,000 to 850,000. And they're also considering conducting PCR tests by prioritizing groups such as the elderly, workers at nursing homes, and people who are at higher risk of becoming severely ill.
And from Monday, the vaccine pass system was expanded to include department stores and large supermarkets. What was the reaction from the public on the first day?
Right, like you said, Monday was the first day of vaccine passes being implemented in department stores as well as large supermarkets, and there was inevitable confusion at some sites. Some people were not aware of the new measures, while others found it difficult to use the mobile app to show proof of vaccination.
People are really confused. There are delays as some elderly find it difficult to utilize QR codes.
There were those who thought that the passes are needed to curb the spread of the virus, while there were also those who were against the idea.
I think it's a measure that can stabilize the current resurgence. I don't think it's too much.
Some people can't get vaccinated because of fear over vaccine side effects or health issues. It will affect their daily lives if they can't go to supermarkets.
With the ongoing controversy surrounding the vaccine pass policy, there have also been talks on whether unvaccinated people should get treated for COVID-19 at their own expense, like in some overseas countries. But the government on Monday clarified that they are not considering this approach, as it may appear as a form of discrimination against those who aren't vaccinated.
Well, that sounds like some good news for people who haven't been vaccinated yet. But Min-jung, amid the government's efforts to contain the spread of the virus, there are indicators that the virus situation in South Korea is slightly improving.
Right. The authorities on Monday bumped down the country's weekly virus risk level to medium for the first time in 7 weeks. This is down by 2 notches as the country remained at the very high risk level for 6 consecutive weeks. By region, the capital area was at medium risk last week, while regions outside the Greater Seoul area were at low risk. Although indicators are showing that the country is recovering slowly, health authorities are on high alert with the spread of Omicron, as I mentioned earlier, and also due to the upcoming Korean Lunar New Year holiday, Seollal.
Right, both of those things are important considerations when it comes to social distancing measures. Talking about Lunar New Year here and Omicron. I hear there are some updates in that regard as well.
Right. Authorities will be announcing new social distancing measures sometime this week, and they're expected to ease the current distancing rules. Currently, social gatherings are limited to a maximum of 4 people, and most businesses must close at 9 p.m. The new measures will be implemented next Monday, as the current measures will only last until this week. Watchers are expecting officials to ease the current distancing rules as daily infections declined in recent days amid the country's booster vaccination drive and vaccine pass mandates. Officials stress that it is important to ease measures for social distancing first rather than vaccine passes because it has a greater economic impact on society. But like you said, authorities are still cautious as they are bracing for an uptick in cases with the spread of Omicron and the upcoming holiday.
So let's wait and see what the new measures would be. Anyway, thank you, Min-jung, for your updates. We'll talk to you again soon.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, as always. Now, COVID-19 hospitalizations in the United States hit a record high Monday as Omicron sweeps across that country.
According to Reuters, 132,646 people were in hospital with the virus, breaking the previous record of just above 132,000 set in January. The situation is also dire in Italy, with 3.4% of the population in quarantine. And after confirming its first local Omicron cases over the weekend, Tianjin, a city of 14 million near Beijing, has shut down all routes to Beijing and is carrying out PCR tests on its entire population. South Korean President Moon Jae-in will this weekend embark on a trip to the Middle East to meet with his counterparts in the UAE, Saudi Arabia, and Egypt. The South Korean leader will also attend a business forum in each of the countries. Our senior Blue House correspondent Kim Min-ji reports.
President Moon Jae-in will be making a week-long tour to the Middle East on Saturday that will take him to the United Arab Emirates, Saudi Arabia, and Egypt.
The visit, which was postponed due to the COVID-19 situation in 2020, is expected to strengthen trust and friendship with the leaders of 3 Middle Eastern nations that are actively moving away from petroleum and pushing to diversify their industries. And with this, we aim to expand the base for cooperation with these countries. The Middle East is South Korea's biggest energy import destination and biggest overseas construction market, and is an important region in terms of stabilizing energy supply chains and securing future growth engines.
Starting off his schedule in the UAE on Sunday, Moon will attend a business roundtable meeting and later visit the 2020 Dubai Expo for a ceremony to mark Day of Korea. Moon will also hold talks with Mohammed bin Rashid Al Maktoum, Prime Minister of the UAE. The following day, Moon will attend the opening ceremony of the Abu Dhabi Sustainability Week and meet with Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed, Crown Prince of Abu Dhabi. This is Moon's first visit to the UAE in 4 years, the last time the two sides agreed to elevate their ties to a special strategic partnership. Moon will then travel to Saudi Arabia, South Korea's biggest trade partner in the Middle East and its #1 market for overseas construction, for a 2-day visit on January 18th. During his stay, Moon will meet with Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman Al Saud, attend a business forum, and also hold talks with the Secretary General of the Gulf Cooperation Council. The final leg of Moon's trip will take him to Egypt, a center of international logistics and a foothold for South Korean companies entering Africa. It's the second time for a South Korean leader to visit the country and the first in 16 years. During his 2-day visit, Moon will hold a summit with Egypt's President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi and attend a business meeting. The top office says it expects the Middle East trip to serve as an opportunity to solidify South Korea's foothold for cooperation not just in traditional sectors such as energy and construction, but promising areas such as healthcare, science, technology, and climate change. Discussions for peace and stability on the Korean Peninsula and the Middle East are also expected. Moon will return to Seoul on January 22nd. Kim Min-ji, Arirang News.
For South Koreans overseas who want to vote in the presidential election in March, the registration period came to a close this weekend, but with far fewer people signing up last time. The number of people who signed up came to just over 231,000, or around 11.5% of all those who were eligible. There were more eligible voters this time, but the number who was registered was around 23% lower than the last election in 2017. The country with the highest number of overseas voters registered was the U.S., followed by China and then Japan. Voting will start on February 23rd and end on the 28th. As of now, there will be 206 polling stations worldwide, but lawmakers are working to add around 15 more.
South Korea's Unification Ministry has pledged to monitor possible changes to North Korea's anti-pandemic policies. This response out of Seoul coming after the regime revealed it's shifting to, quote, more advanced measures to deal with COVID-19, despite still claiming to have zero cases. Bae-in-ji with the details.
Just like last year, North Korea announced that virus prevention measures will remain at the top of its annual agenda. But it shows some signs that virus prevention will be done a little differently this year. The regime's state-run newspaper Nodongshinmun said on Monday that the measures need to be more advanced and people-oriented, instead of ones that focus on controlling the virus. In response, Seoul's Unification Ministry said on Monday that it will keep a close eye on the North's moves to see if there are any changes, such as the possible lifting of its strict border restrictions.
The government will closely monitor the policies recently proposed by the North, especially on whether this will lead to easing border controls.
When asked if South Korea plans to supply vaccines to the North, the ministry spokesperson said there are no specific plans yet. But the spokesperson added that cooperation between the two Koreas is important for people's safety in both regions. However, one industry watcher says people-oriented policies does not necessarily mean lifting the current measures. He says since last year, Kim Jong-un has been emphasizing that the entire North Korean policy should be people-friendly. But that does not mean the regime is going to put in place a policy that's more market-friendly or less restrictive.
So I think what they really mean here is that overall COVID-19 policies is still going to be ideologically driven, which means in North Korea that they're going to still put a lot of emphasis on prevention rather than more proactive or more scientific responses such as launching massive vaccination campaigns.
On supplying vaccines, he says South Korea should be ready to hand out vaccines in case the North changes its current policies, which are less about vaccination and more about prevention and quarantine measures. But given that North Korea is very conservative regarding its public health policies, he says he is skeptical about whether the regime is actually going to be open to the idea of mass vaccinations. North Korea is one of the few countries in the world that has not started a COVID-19 vaccination program. Bae-in-ji, Arirang News.
Now it's time for On Point, where we speak to experts to delve deeper into the biggest news stories in the spotlight right now. As we mentioned at the top of the programme, South Korea's Joint Chiefs of Staff has said that North Korea fired another unidentified as yet projectile into the East Sea. That happened sometime this morning. This comes just a week after the regime claimed it fired a hypersonic missile that precisely hit a set target 700 kilometers away.
The international community was quick to condemn the North for raising tensions last week, and similar responses are also expected in the coming hours. And just in the next few hours, the UN Security Council is set to convene a closed-door meeting to discuss whether the latest launches go against its resolutions. For more on the significance of this launch, we connect to Mark Barry, a North Korea expert and the associate editor of the International Journal on World Peace. Good morning, Mark.
Good morning.
So like we just mentioned, we still don't have any detailed information on North Korea's latest launch of an unidentified projectile. But given that it just came about a week later since its latest launch, what do you make of this? What could this signal?
You know, it's easy to think that it's another hypersonic missile. My feeling is it could be slightly different than what they had tested on January 5th, which again was different than what they had tested in September. But it could also just be another short-range missile, another kind of cruise missile. they have to test. They have to test for military and technical reasons, and at the same time, they have to test to be able to make it clear to people that we're not succumbing to our internal difficulties, and therefore we are able to test, and it's a sign of the health of the regime. That said, I am thinking that maybe they're not happy that Ukraine and Kazakhstan and Russia are getting all the attention right now.
Yeah, as we all know, North Korea likes to be the center of attention when it can be. But given the information we have thus far, we don't know much about what happened this morning, but in regards to last week's launch, do you think the launch of this hypersonic missile, which they say precisely hit a target 700 kilometers away, means that the regime has made significant progress technologically speaking, since its first hypersonic missile launch back in September of 2021?
Well, the tests that we know about, and maybe they're tests that are never revealed and remain classified, and maybe we're not that successful, but I think the ones that we know about show incremental progress. As a layman, as far as those kinds of missile dynamics are concerned. But another thing that the tests do is they cause uncertainty and worry for the U.S. and South Korea and Japan, and that's also part of the North's purposes. But I noticed there's sort of like three kinds of reactions. South Korea and the U.S. downplay the launch, and for that reason, even the U.S. ambassador to the UN just before the UN Security Council meeting started at 3 p.m. Eastern Time, she made sure it was designated a ballistic missile. On the other hand, the defense analysts, they like to emphasize what they think is new and what is concerning, and that's their job. And then, of course, the North overplays what it accomplished, and that's why last week they only released just one photo, not gobs of photos as they had done in the past. So basically, it's also their way to ring in the new year and remind the world that they can't be ignored, especially with the year beginning in earnest with lots of crises all over.
Now, staying with the hypersonic missile launch last week, what are the implications of North Korea having a reliable hypersonic missile? And do you think they're receiving help from outside countries since, it's a very high-tech weapon?
Well, if North Korea acquires a true hypersonic weapon, and they are not the ones to define what is a true hypersonic weapon, it's done by other nations, other experts, but a true hypersonic weapon with its low altitude, maneuverability, and somewhat greater accuracy, it potentially enhances North Korea's nuclear arsenal, which is estimated at roughly about 45 deliverable weapons. They may be nowhere near that capability, as a matter of fact, but they do want us to worry due to our lack of information. Excuse me, and I don't rule out outside help, but it's really not, in my view, in Russia or China's interest to assist North Korea with such a high-tech missile program. More likely, North Korea is figuring out things based on what they've already achieved and on what technical data they quite likely acquire through cyber means.
And if North Korea decides it wants to deploy a hypersonic missile as a credible weapon, do you think that means that we are going to see a bunch more of these tests over the coming months and years?
Well, I'm thinking with the March 9th presidential elections in South Korea, we may see a whole string of them. But I should note that I think there's been insufficient attention paid to the possibility of North Korea exporting its latest missile technologies to a bad actor, particularly Iran. The North's tech transfer can be used as what many political scientists call a mischief factor, as well as, of course, a foreign currency earner. In particular, last month, Israeli Defense Minister Benny Gantz visited the Pentagon, and he told U.S. officials he had instructed the Israeli Defense Forces to prepare for a strike against Iran. I followed his career for the last 10 years. This man doesn't joke around. He's quite serious. And Israel as a whole remains dubious of any new Iran deal. So North Korea knows that Israeli military action against Iran would affect the entire Middle East region and draw in the U.S. And we should remember that in 2007, Israel destroyed a Syrian nuclear facility being constructed by North Koreans.
And before we let you go, Mark, what about the international reaction? We just heard that the UNSC is planning to convene a meeting in the coming hours to discuss North Korea's latest launch of missile launch last week. But how do you think with the launch today, this morning, how would neighbors react to this?
Well, the meeting began at 3. It may still be going on. Perhaps after this broadcast, some news will leak out. There should be no official announcement from the UN Security Council, but Ambassador Thomas Greenfield from the United States, representing only 6 of the 15 members of the Security Council, released a joint statement condemning the January 5th, and she pointedly used the word ballistic missile launch. But China and Russia, as permanent 5 members, are unlikely to endorse any consensus Security Council statement, but will reiterate that real negotiations between the U.S. and North Korea must resume as the best way to resolve regional tensions. And frankly, in that particular context, I think they're not wrong. Things just can't go on like this. That there has to be more jaw-jaw rather than war-war.
Well, as always, Mark, we appreciate your insights and we look forward to having you back on the show, perhaps under more peaceful circumstances. Thank you.
Look forward to it. Thank you.
The veteran South Korean actor O Yeong-su, who garnered worldwide fame for his role in the smash hit Netflix series Squid Game, has become the first Korean to win a Golden Globe. The show itself and lead actor Lee Jung-jae were also nominated, but fell short of winning. Kim Yeon-sing with this story.
Player number 1 of Squid Game has become the first South Korean to win an award at the Golden Globe. 77-year-old actor O Yeong-su has taken home the prize as Best Supporting Actor for his screen-stealing role as Oh Il-nam in the smash hit Netflix series. Squid Game and actor Lee Jung-jae were also nominated in the categories of Best Television Series Drama and Best Performance by an Actor in a Television Series Drama, respectively. Although they failed to win, it was still the first time that a South Korean show and actor had been nominated for those categories. But despite the historic moment for Squid Game and its stars, this year's Golden Globes did not share the triumph. The Golden Globes is even older than actor Oh Yeong-su himself, having honored widely acclaimed television shows and films for 79 years. But its host organization, the Hollywood Foreign Press Association, has recently been laced with criticisms for lack of diversity and allegations of corruption. The awards ceremony this year decided to run without its usual Hollywood glitz. There was no red carpet, no nominees glammed up in their tuxes and gowns, no live cast, and not even a live stream of the event. Instead, HFPA members announced the winners and posted them on social media. But it seems like the modest setup of the Golden Globes didn't taint the big win for Oh Yeong-su. The actor said to Netflix on Monday that after he had heard the news of his win, he thought to himself for the first time in his life that he's a fine guy. He also added that he thanks everyone out in the world with a heart full of love for his family and the scent of Korea's culture. Kim Yeon-sung, Arirang News.
South Korea's presidential candidates are out and about in a bid to drum up support ahead of the election in March. Other than pledges focusing on the economy or international relations, promises that directly affect people's daily lives are also under the spotlight. Our political correspondent Lee Kyung-eun with more.
The ruling Democratic Party's presidential candidate Lee Jae-myung promised to root out private membership in public golf courses. They're supposed to be open to anyone. That's one of Lee's so-called small but definite happiness proposals.
Presidential pledges tend to be complicated and focus on grand goals, but we shifted our thoughts and decided to make promises on those things that could seem trivial, but are important to people.
The proposals number more than 40 now, including rentals for young job interviewees being among the most popular. Also under review is adding hair loss treatments to be covered by the National Health Insurance. Meanwhile, the main opposition People Power Party's Yoon Sung-yeol is calling his pledges 심쿵, saying that they're so attractive that they make people's heart race. These include placing partitions in taxis to protect taxi drivers, expanding public pet shelters, and increasing electric car chargers in gas stations.
Pledges cannot just come from officials simply putting their heads together. They should come from what is happening in people's actual lives.
There's a good reason why candidates are pumping out these pledges. A survey looked at the top 10 issues that voters want to be addressed, and securing a place to live through stabilizing housing prices came first. Back in 2017, when the election was held due to the impeachment of the then president, the top issue was more of a grand goal: anti-corruption and political reform. The small pledges could also be tailored designed for voters in their 20s and 30s who say they want a president who makes their livelihood better, with buying a house being their top priority, followed by making more money and getting jobs. Environment protection and unification between the two Koreas were among the least important issues for them. Observers say just as important as the pledges themselves is the financial plan that the candidates come up with to turn those pledges into reality. Lee Young-eun, Arirang News.
Now it's time to cross over to our O Yeong for Global Insight and an in-depth look at important developments in world affairs.
Thanks, Mark. It's time for Global Insights, where we speak to experts from around the world to hear their views on issues making headlines. The world's biggest tech show wrapped up over the weekend in Las Vegas. The Consumer Electronics Show this year was held on a slightly more muted note due to cancellations and concerns over the surge of the Omicron variant. But the annual exhibition generally sets the tone for major trends in tech for the rest of the year, generating a great amount of excitement and speculation leading up to the day of the opening. So to go over the hottest gadgets and concepts presented at CES in 2022, we connect with Gareth Beavis, Global Editor-in-Chief of Tech Radar. Very warm welcome to you. Thank you for joining us on the show.
Not a problem. Lovely to be here.
And it was a very exciting week last week, a very exciting weekend as the show wrapped up, and we got a sort of a sneak peek of all the tech developments that are going to be trending this year. And before we get to those developments, though, first of all, the atmosphere surrounding CES, there was a lot of skepticism and maybe some concerns over whether the exhibition this year would be what it was in previous years, as big names such as Microsoft, Google, Amazon, Mercedes-Benz, they dropped out last minute because of the Omicron situation. Well, how did you find CES this year? Do you think it was able to deliver and generate the same kind of buzz?
I think it's an interesting concept because CES is very much about being there in Las Vegas, experiencing the show, basically going through the halls and finding all these different curious pieces of technology, seeing what's new, seeing and working out what the trends are by being there and sort of feeling the buzz of what people are talking about. However, it's still the place where things are launched and keynotes happen. And as you can see by the images, that the halls were far, far, far more sparse than usual. It's 75% down on attendance compared to 2019. I spoke to people who are out there and they could see the carpet, which is a rare thing for Las Vegas, because usually you're crammed in because people are scurrying around trying to find the latest stuff. So there are certain brands not being there that are more about the cachet than anything else. So Microsoft, Google, Amazon, what they're announcing can be done by a press release, and what they show isn't necessarily on the floor itself. But there is a few other ones, Mercedes, BMW, who still did have a presence. It's just not to the same level that we expected. So I think if the cancellations or the worries had happened earlier in the year, perhaps around July, August, I think it would be a very different show. But it happened far too close for brands like Samsung, LG, Hyundai to pull out of their keynotes, and they just stream them virtually. So from our perspective, we were desperately sad not to be there, because it is where you go to meet people, to network, to make the contacts, to set your year, basically, to let companies know what you're about as a media agency too, and it helps really foster that relationship. But equally, I feel like we got the full effect of all the news and all the announcements. It's just a shame we couldn't try the stuff.
And well, of course, when you do go to the Las Vegas show, TV panels, they're pretty much the centerpiece of the event, with the dazzling displays just everywhere in the Samsung, LG booth, Sony. And well, this year it seems that it was all about the quantum dot quality. And well, first of all, could you explain what the QD OLED displays are all about, and what you made of Sony's new TV?
Yeah, quantum dot OLED is the buzzword for this year. We luckily got to see some of these displays beforehand in briefings and demonstrations, so we had a very good idea of what was happening in the TV space, because that's always the exciting part of CES. It's the new TVs, it's the displays, things people can get really excited about. It's where we saw curved displays for the first time. HD TV. This is where CES has made its name over the years. Quantum dot OLED. Now, quantum dot is popularized by Samsung over the years, and Samsung also is making the quantum dot OLED panel for Sony. It just depends how different manufacturers take those from Samsung Display and customize it themselves. Now, what quantum dot does, OLED displays are wonderful, and I've been tracking them for years, since I wrote for an OLED newsletter 15 years ago. And from the very inception of technology to now, it's been wonderful to see it grow. So an OLED display is emissive. So what you have with a normal LCD panel is a light behind, and then you basically put little colored gates in front of it that will show the different pixels, and that's the way that you get to see the images and the colors. Obviously, that can have things like light bleed through. Although technology has evolved a lot over the years, it can still not look as high quality. With OLEDs, they're self-emissive, which means if it's off, it's completely black and it's off. If it's on, you just see the light, which is why you can get these really bright, really clear, really colorful displays. However, what they do is they create light out of basically placing one color on top of another one to try and make a different kind of white light, which doesn't necessarily always work in the same way. And what quantum dot does is uses a thin blue layer at the back, and then places the colors on top of that. And what that allows the technology to do is to have up to 200% more brightness, control the colors more accurately, have a wider viewing angle, because the colors aren't being locked off as badly. And so it basically can create a much more vivid, inky black, but very beautiful in terms of color display panels, and that's what's going to make the big difference this year.
Right, well, it was a bit disappointing that Samsung didn't unveil its own QD OLED TV, but well, when it does though, what are you expecting to see, and what do you think it's going to have to do really to beat Sony's model?
Well, I mean, Samsung is obviously the largest TV manufacturer in the world, and we're as surprised as anybody else that Samsung didn't bring its own set out. There were rumors, even to the point of a Samsung set being announced on the innovation panel, so we were very much expecting it to turn up. So it's a curious thing that it hasn't, but we're expecting it very soon. I mean, Samsung hasn't actually got a very long history in the OLED TV market, very much for smartphones, but it's focused heavily on QLED. So this is obviously the next step for Samsung in the future. What Samsung can do, like I said, it only supplies the panels for Samsung Display. Samsung Electronics obviously does some things very different, so they can work very well with audio, for instance. Samsung's very good at creating audio out of its speakers. It has tremendous marketing appeal and a connected ecosystem. So, Samsung smartphones are among the most popular in the world. People can connect those to their smartphone. It has a more robust interface, one might say. Sony uses Android TV, but Samsung's a lot more stripped back and clear. I think a combination of all those things together, plus the fact that it can be more aggressive on price, means that the ability for Samsung to bring quality panels and do it in a way that the users resonate with is fairly likely.
Right, well, of course, with LG, there was that the world's smallest OLED TV that they launched, and some other interesting features as well. What other TVs or features did you find quite eye-catching this year?
Well, we had large TVs. LG again did the 97-inch OLED. We had TCL doing a 98-inch TV with Roku on board. These are far more, I say, affordable. They're far more affordable than they were before, sort of under $10,000 US, which is it's still a huge amount of money. But for somebody who's desperate for these TVs that would just conceptual space age not very long ago. It's amazing to see them coming down so far. But we shouldn't overlook this idea of the 42-inch OLED. This is the first time we've seen this technology get down to this size. And as I mentioned, OLED is one of the most premium TV technologies out there. And for LG to be able to offer that at a smaller size with a lower cost means that more people will be able to enjoy it, especially in apartments where spaces are premium. And 55-inch, 65-inch is not really possible. That's huge. We've also seen Samsung QN900B 8K QLED TV. Again, very much a high-end TV that people who want the very best to have. This is going to push the boundaries again in terms of picture quality and imagery, and Samsung's been doing QLED for a very long time. It very much knows what it's doing in there and is able to do lots of things like figure out the foreground and the background more clearly, more responsive and sharp pixels. It takes all the advantages of LED TV and makes that better. One of the most interesting things I saw was the Panasonic LZ2000 OLED TV. Now, it's not the panel itself, although Panasonic does do very good OLED panels. It's the audio that it's offering. So it does this thing called directional audio. So it can actually focus the sound to different parts of the room. So, for instance, say there's a family watching TV and you want one person to have it up loud, but everyone else is going to be distracted. You can direct the audio so that while everyone can hear it, it won't be anywhere near as loud as that one person. Or you can direct it to a group of people. Or for those that are hard of hearing, they can have elevated volume compared to everybody else, and it won't need to be on a separate system or relay or a headset. And that's the kind of thing that I think is really exciting. It doesn't always have to be the TV display panel that's the key thing for a TV set.
Oh, and well, in addition to these dazzling displays and new audio systems, of course, we can't leave out mobility now because, well, CES has become something of a car show in recent years. And, well, which concept vehicles did you find interesting at this year's show?
I think mobility, electric vehicles, car concepts, as you mentioned, were a really key and exciting part of this year's show. There were so many different brands and key, well-known brands doing interesting things. So Mercedes crossing the 1,000-kilometer range. It was a target they set themselves with their concept car, with the EQXX. They said, we wanted to find a way to make a car go this far. So they used technology from their Formula One workings. They made the car just one of the most drag efficient around. They used all the different technologies to try and make this concept car get to over 1,000 kilometers, but it's very close to road legal, which is the very exciting thing. BMW, as we saw with the iX Flow concept, where the car can change from white to black, it's a gimmick in some ways. People can see that as when we're going to use that, but it does offer a lot of opportunity. People have been talking for years about cars that can alter the outside. People love customization, and where this will be used probably in the short term is maybe the front grille. For electric vehicles, don't need that grille for cooling the car necessarily, so they could use that for something else. It's basically real estate. And in the future, this could also be used to let the driver know how much charge is left in the car. You could use it to just customize your own the way that you want to drive the car. These things are really exciting. Sony was a surprise for us. We know Sony's already had the vision concept in the past, but Sony Mobility is now a new company, and we've got the very real possibility that we could see a Sony car on the road in the near future. Sony themselves are sort of exploring the possibility with the commercial viability, so it's a long way from being certain. But the Vision O2 concept with many sensors and the ability to see inside and outside the cockpit, again, it was very interesting. Sony presented this idea of using 5G to be able to connect to multiple users at once and to identify possible crashes in real time, to alert you that someone's coming down the freeway at a different direction than where you're going. This will initiate a crash. They say they'll do that by things like messages, which seems a little bit dangerous, but we'll see how that pans out in real time. But there was lots of other interesting things, like the Chevrolet Equinox EV, bringing that in $10,000 cheaper than Tesla. The companies now are really sticking it to Tesla and saying, right, you think you're the only EV manufacturer, we're coming for you, and we're going to expect you to step up. And that means that Tesla now needs the Model 2, this much vaunted cheap production car that that will take it out of the premium space and bring it into the more everyday user situation. So lots of exciting things. And we haven't even talked about LG's Omnipod concept, which was just bizarre and saw people in cinemas and working offices being driven around and having dresses appear out of the side pods. So less of a real life concept, but more of an exciting one.
And well, last year the words metaverse and NFT, they became part of our everyday language. Perhaps they've been overused in our everyday language in terms of media coverage. But well, how were these trends reflected at CES this year?
I mean, the metaverse it's bordering on nonsense at this point. It's just another word for the internet with virtual reality. And the reason that this is nonsense is because there isn't a metaverse. There's no such thing. A metaverse is just a connected set of people operating in a different way. And so all these companies, and there was a great Twitter user who was going through, and Nima Zagami, sorry, was going through and looking to sort of find all the different smaller companies that are talking about things like their metaverse. And he counted 15 alone just talking about things that had no real notion of what this metaverse is. Obviously we've seen Meta, the company that was formerly Facebook, talking about it with Horizon World. That's one version of it. Samsung was showing off its own version of it with Zepeto as their own virtual world. But in reality, we saw lots of companies talking about the headsets that you can use and the ways that it can work. And arguably, Meta Mobility from Hyundai was the most realistic, where instead of your physical presence being used in a virtual world, it goes one step further, and you control robots, for instance, that are interacting in the real world. Whether that could be on Mars, walking around, and you can get the feeling from their sensors, so the wind or the atmosphere there and what it feels like under the feet. That's amazing. But in reality, lots of companies are talking it up. It's not a real thing yet. And what we really need is a smaller brand to come through, maybe make really cheap hardware that's universally acceptable for lots of people. And it's just the thing that everyone piles in on. Second Life was a metaverse. You could argue that any multiplayer game is a metaverse. It just needs that level of understanding and people to all get on board and to want to be part of it for it to become the metaverse. But really, like I said, it's just the internet with virtual reality, and it needs a lot more.
We did indeed see a lot of companies just jumping on the bandwagon, though, with this word, and Samsung launching it, making customers able to buy NFTs on its platform, which, it's questionable how much people are going to actually get involved in that. But, another big part of CES are, of course, the robots and the very random gimmickry. We had even Arirang TV launching its own AI anchor based off our managing editor, Jennifer Moon. And there were, of course, other things like loo roll fetching robots and finger biting, finger nibbling furry pets and things like that. So what were some of your favorites that you saw this year?
I mean, you mentioned there the Amigami Ham Ham. It was an absolute favorite of the whole team. It's that idea of, the nibbling pet without actually being disgusting, covered in bacteria, and having to wash your hands afterwards. But everyone loved the idea of the cutesiness of it. There was loads of things, and this is really the benefit of being able to go to CES and to see these things. Because you mentioned there the Charmin robot that would go and deliver toilet roll when you needed it. The fundamental principle of that is that robots are now becoming able to do the things that people might need, to offer functions that weren't able previously. This year we saw things like robots that are able to, move things around for you properly. The idea being that there could be actual mobility robots that can help you move furniture or to do things like that in the real life. That's amazing. But there's also things like the Amica robot with facial features that were far more, as you would expect from sci-fi movies like iRobot and previously. It starts to look like things like that. And it's quite eerie and, bordering on creepy for some people. And to be told, oh, don't worry, it's 10 years away, for me is still a bit too close. 10 years is not long enough to be able to see those kind of things walking around in the street. But in terms of the day-to-day stuff that we were interested in, the Novito invisible headphones was by far the most popular story on Tech Radar. And it uses this idea of a soundbar that, again, similar to Panasonic, will offer directional waves, but this one will actually track your head, work out where your ears are, and direct the sounds into small pockets by your ears. So it sounds like you're wearing headphones without actually doing it. They truly are invisible. And by the same token, people around you within 1 meter will only be able to hear about 20% of the sound. So it's really cool to see that kind of thing. We had the smart dog collar from Invoxia, which would uses infrared sensors and radar to be able to look through your dog's skin, basically, to be able to check the respiration, heart rate. This hasn't been able to be done before. And for pet owners around the world who really need this kind of insight, who really want to find out if their pets are okay and their health, in the same way you might wear an Apple Watch or a Fitbit to check your own health, this is going to be game-changing for a lot of people. And so this technology is great. And we've already mentioned Hyundai, working with Boston Dynamics, the great things that are happening there. But also the 10 Minds pillow. This is one that will listen for you snoring during the night and will move your head around for you. The OO game haptic vest, that was one that could make things like the metaverse if a connected situation did work. That sounds mildly scary because that allows you to feel things in the real world. So if you're in a game and you get shot, apparently you can feel the bullet going in and going out, and if you're bleeding, that dripping down at the same time. It sounds a little bit too visceral, but this is the kind of sort of next-gen stuff that we're seeing there, which is, it's really exciting.
Well, we could talk on and on for hours, and I really wish we could, but unfortunately this is where we have to wrap up this segment today. That was Gareth Beavis, Global Editor-in-Chief of Tech Radar. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Even after nearly 8 hours of high-stake talks in Geneva, the U.S. and Russia failed on Monday to narrow their differences over Ukraine. Washington pushed back on Moscow's demands, describing them as, quote, non-starters. But Russia vowed there would be no escalation of tensions with Kiev, and Moscow has no intention of invading the Ukraine. Kim Hyo-sun with this report.
The U.S. and Russia made little progress on Monday, narrowing their differences during their highly anticipated security talks in Geneva. Despite huddling together for nearly 8 hours, the two countries remain far from reaching an agreement on each other's security concerns. During the talks, which Russian officials described as difficult, long, but very professional, they underscored Russia has no plans to invade Ukraine. Russia's Deputy Foreign Minister also said that despite Moscow highlighting the need to see some flexibility from NATO, the U.S. did not provide such an assurance.
I don't think you will expect me saying otherwise than to confirm that this is one of the areas where we have the greatest difference of views with the U.S. The U.S. suggests that there is no way that Russia or whoever else may have a say on those type of issues. But we underscore that for us it's absolutely mandatory to make sure that Ukraine never ever becomes member of NATO.
U.S. Deputy Secretary of State Wendy Sherman stressed that no one will be allowed to undermine NATO's open door policy, adding Washington will not forego bilateral cooperation with countries that want to work with the U.S. Both sides remain pessimistic on expectations for a diplomatic breakthrough. The U.S. said it was 8 hours of discussions rather than a negotiation. Moscow also said the main questions remain up in the air. The talks, the first in a series that will take place across Europe this week, revolved around Kremlin's demands for security guarantees from Western powers. Kim Hyo-sun, Arirang News.
Now, after the worst violence in independent Kazakhstan's 30-year history, the situation across the country is actually rather calm and remains so. The country's National Security Committee said Monday that extremist groups had a hand in the nationwide riots, adding it's continuing its search and will arrest those who joined the riots and carried out acts of terrorism. The Kazakh government says nearly 8,000 people have been arrested thus far. Over 160 people were killed in the violence.
Let's take a look at what's going on in the world now. Serbian tennis star Novak Djokovic won a court battle on Monday, allowing him to stay in Australia to play in the Australian Open. However, the Australian government may be preparing for a second set, as it may threaten to cancel his visa for the second time. Shortly after the Federal Circuit Court reinstated Djokovic's visa, after initially deciding he didn't meet the criteria for an exemption to an entry requirement that all non-citizens be fully vaccinated, government lawyer Christopher Tran told the judge that the Minister for Immigration, Citizenship, Migrant Services and Multicultural Affairs will consider whether to exercise a personal power of cancellation. While sources say the minister has yet to make any decision yet, such a decision would mean the Serbian could again face deportation and could miss the Australian Open, which begins next Monday. The heavily indebted property firm China Evergrande Group has moved out of its headquarters in Shenzhen to another property in the city in order to cut costs. The company issued a statement on Monday after a Chinese media outlet reported that the company had moved to its headquarters from Shenzhen to nearby Guangzhou. The company says it has moved out of Shenzhen's Excellence Center, a property owned by another company, to a building that Evergrande owns in the city. No further details on the new setup were provided. Evergrande is the world's most indebted developer, currently struggling to repay more than $300 billion in liabilities, including nearly $20 billion in offshore bonds deemed to be in cross-default by rating agencies last month after it defaulted. By Monday afternoon, the company's logo had been partially removed on one side of the Excellence Center. Evergrande was founded in Guangzhou, but moved to Shenzhen in 2017. Massive floods around South Africa's eastern coast city of East London have killed at least 10 people and left hundreds without homes since the weekend. Local media footage showed rivers bursting through banks, leaving roads inundated. It also reported that hundreds of homes had been washed away in the iron roof informal settlements just outside the city. Scientists predict that climate change is the cause of the worsening floods and droughts along South Africa's eastern coastline. The deadly flood comes despite the country's Department of Environment drawing up a plan for the country to adapt to climate change in 2019, which included strengthening its preparedness to respond more quickly to weather disasters and help victims recover. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
Good morning. The air feels nothing like yesterday. Yes, it's much colder than the same time yesterday. In fact, it feels like minus 15 degrees Celsius here in the capital, and highs will also only go up to minus 4 degrees this afternoon. So a cold wave advisory has been reissued in the parts of Gangwon-do and Gyeonggi-do provinces, with a heavy snow advisory remaining in place in mountainous regions on Jeju, with more snow expected there and on the west coast of Jeollado province, along with a strong wind advisory. Inland regions including Seoul received light flurries overnight, so please drive and walk with care. Mostly sunny skies to start the day, except for those snow-affected regions. But much improved air quality across Korea. Daytime highs will be 5 to 7 degrees lower this afternoon across much of the country. And it looks like it's going to be even colder tomorrow. And this round of the extreme cold snap will last throughout the week. With that, here's a look at the weather conditions around the world.
And that's all we have for now. We'll be back at 8 a.m. Korea time on Wednesday for our next edition of New Day at Arirang. We appreciate you tuning in. I'm Kim Mo-gyan.
And I'm Mark Bream. Thank you as always for joining us. We'll see you again tomorrow. Until next time, goodbye.